Apartment 6 podcast. It's Jess, and I am solo today. So you are getting just Jessie today. I hope that's okay. The last time I did this, it was my episode about imposter syndrome, and today I'm coming at you with a different topic, and also a topic that I'm planning to not really script. So last time I sat down with notes and a timeline and bullet points, and I really stuck to script, but today I decided I kind of wanted to just sit down and see what happens if I just take the general topic and just run with it and talk and fill space. So I obviously if you're listening to this right now, if it made it to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that those good places, then it went well, and if not, then you're not hearing this anyway. But I will start us off with my roses and my thorns. So I would say my thorn for this week is probably, obviously, it is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, her passing, and subsequently the rush to fill her seat. Obviously, there shouldn't be a rush. In fact, when this happened to Obama, they said that he wasn't allowed to appoint anyone. But of course, with Trump, all the rules bend, and he's trying to appoint someone in an election year. And I just feel, really down about politics right now. I feel really nervous, anxious about this upcoming election. And I want to say that I feel hopeful, but I honestly don't, because I just tend to feel like with Trump, things just happen. And, he's not that things just happen. That's like not the right phrasing of it. He's making things happen. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it seems like even if the votes are for Joe Biden, it feels like Trump is somehow going to win because he's going to make sure of that. And, I don't want to get too deep into this because I think that it's something that we're all feeling, and I don't want to dwell on it right now during this episode because the podcast is kind of supposed to be an escape, I guess we've never really said that, but it pretty much is. I mean, it's supposed to be a fun thing for me and Marissa, and then by extension, it's supposed to sort of feel like a fun thing for you guys who are listening, and it's supposed to be a way for you to feel like you're chatting with friends, and that means talking about serious things sometimes, but I also want to keep in mind that this is entertainment, and I've had a lot of conversations in the last week or so with people in my life about the election. And so I feel like that's sort of what the thorn is. It's just that every time I think about the state of the world, I just feel really like hopeless. And that's a sucky way to feel. But no matter what, no matter how down I feel about it now, I think it's important to remember that this too shall pass, and that we're going to keep going on because we have to keep going on. And so when I've been feeling really overwhelmed by it and really anxious about it, I just tell myself, you know what? That's not something you individually can tackle today. And the world's going to keep going on, and everything's going to be okay. And it's not going to help you to sit and stew about this right now. So if you're feeling really overwhelmed by this election, I would encourage you to also try to reframe it for yourself and say, okay, this is a really trying time and I'm having difficult conversations with family members or friends, but it's not always going to be like this. And this is just an uncomfortable time, and it's okay to have uncomfortable times. A lot of times really great growth and really great learning comes from them. So that's my thorn for the week after that whole spiel. And my rose is actually about to come. So I am getting an iPad for my 25th birthday. My mom, I mentioned to her that I really would like an iPad, and that I kind of was feeling weird about it because I already have an Apple computer. I have a Mac MacBook Pro, the laptop I bought to go to college. And, I have my iPhone, and I bought myself AirPods this last year for Black Friday. And so I was kind of like, I feel like such a little Apple, hoarder. And I don't know, I feel kind of funny about it. And I talked to people in my life. I talked to Marissa about it. And I kind of was like, this is something I really want and I've wanted for a long time. And so the real rose of it is not just that I'm getting the iPad, which I'm getting it this week because my mom was like, I'm just going to buy it now and I'm going to ship it to you. So like you can have it early, basically. My birthday's not until November 2nd, but she was a sweetheart and bought it for me. And I think that's like, oh my gosh, like that's so generous because it was something that I was thinking about getting for myself. So I bought myself actually the Apple Pencil and I bought myself a case for it. And so the whole reason I want this is not just to have another gadget or to, use it like a laptop because I actually really enjoy my laptop, but I really have had this strong pull toward design in the last few years. I would say even several years, but especially in the last year, I've really been interested in learning how to create online, I guess. I want to create graphics and I want to animate things and I want to just play around with color, and there's something about like I want to do it digitally. I see like all these infographics and I see poetry and illustrations of poetry, and just I love playing with like aesthetics and color and design and feelings and textures and all of that. And I've had this really strong pull to do that. And when I've looked into it, every time I like see someone, say on YouTube or on Instagram or something like that, doing what I want to do, I always like look at what tools they're using, and they're always using an iPad, and they're always using like the app called Procreate. And I, for the longest time, have been like, I want that, I want that, I want that. And like, I've tried to get apps for my phone, but like, it just doesn't feel the same, especially because you're on like a phone, so it's a lot smaller. But then with like the MacBooks, obviously you don't have, what's it called? Finger touch, what is it? Screen? Like you can't touch with your finger. So like you would have to design with your finger pad, and I don't have a mouse, and so I don't know. And so because of that, I also have never invested in any apps. Like I never bought Procreate or Lightroom or Adobe or anything like that, because I always was like, oh, it's like I don't really have the right overall tool, so there's no point in investing in it, and I don't have a thing that I want to design anyway. And I gave myself all of these reasons why I didn't deserve and shouldn't have an iPad or the accessories or design tools that go with it. And then this year, I just, especially with the pandemic, have just felt more and more pulled to design and to try to create things. And I made a list of all the things I want to make with my iPad, and I'm really excited. I'm so excited for it to get here. The thing is, I know that this is going to be, a learning curve. So I'm like imagining that like I get my iPad and I've like designed something by like the end of the night, but I know realistically it's going to be like me looking at the different reviews of apps and buying one or not buying one, trying to find a free version or try a free trial. And then it's going to be like me trying to figure out how to use the app. It's going to be me like setting up my iCloud and then getting frustrated and being like, why the hell does Apple even have an iCloud? It's going to be probably a little bit of a frustrating process and a learning curve, as is getting any new gadget. But I'm really, really excited about it. And I feel like a little kid. Like I feel like I'm getting like my Christmas toy or something. It's really exciting. And yeah, that's honestly my rose, is that I'm getting a toy, I guess, that I really am excited about. And not only that I'm excited to play with, but that I'm excited to potentially explore like a new passion with. I feel like that's really what's exciting for me, is that I'm finally going to have an outlet for this thing that's like been in my head for so long, and like this feeling and this pull that I've had for so long. I'm finally going to like have the tools to do that and like create that, and like actually have the tools, like not like trying to download an app on my phone that doesn't actually give me the right stuff. And yeah, so I just am really excited about that. And I've now talked about getting an iPad for like 5 whole minutes. I'm going to jump off that. Sorry, but that's truly the most exciting thing happening in my life this week. So, you know. So today's topic, I asked our Instagram followers what they would like to see me talk about, if they had any questions. Basically, if you have questions for me, and there were enough of them, I was going to do like maybe a Q&A. If there was a good topic, I was going to run with a topic. And, we don't have a ton of Instagram followers. If you're listening to this, you're probably one of them. I think it's one of those things where not all of our Instagram followers listen, but all of our listeners follow us on Instagram, I think. And so, I didn't get a ton of responses, but that's totally fine. My point is to say that I had a few topics to choose from, and I really liked this one. It said, your personal growth since COVID started, or in general. So, personal growth. This is a great topic, but it's also a very vague one, because when I think about what makes up me as a person outside of who I am as a coworker or as a student, just me at the core, the raw of it, the deep, dark depths of it. I don't know why am I describing myself like a cave? Basically, what I'm trying to say is that, there's so much that makes up every person, and it's hard to think of where to start when someone asks you, where have you seen growth in your personal life? But I feel like one of the things I want to touch on is the fact that I think for me, and I think most people would probably agree with this too, I don't notice growth in myself until usually after it's happened, and I look back and I think, wow, there's so much I didn't know, or wow, I would have handled that so much differently now, or I wouldn't even be in that situation now. I never would have let that happen. And I think that if we all knew how we were going to feel about something in the future, then we would probably act differently. Like if we knew like that we were going to look back and feel embarrassed or ashamed or excited on the flip side, like we would act accordingly and either do that thing or not do it. And that's how I feel about like my own growth. Like if I knew at the time that whatever I was going through was going to amount to a great amount of growth, I would have been like, okay, like, well, what do I need to know? Like, let me just get there already. And I think that, for me, how I measure my own personal growth is, like I just said, looking back at experiences and recognizing that I would do them differently now, that the person that I am today, it's not that I would change how I did them at the time, because, everything's a lesson, but that if that were to happen to me today, my reaction to it would be different and my coping would be different. And I think that in the moment, growth feels like growing pains. Like I remember when I graduated from college, I was in therapy and I would tell my therapist, like, I feel like I'm going through growing pains. Like I'm dealing with like emotional growing pains. Like I feel very emotionally stimulated. Like I could cry, or I feel angry often, or I feel jealous often. Like my emotions were always kind of right below the surface. And I sort of described that as being growing pains, because it felt like I was aware of myself and I was aware of how challenged I felt at the time, and I was aware of how hurt I felt at the time, and I was just going through a lot that I was trying to work through in my brain, and I was trying to process and assess and figure out how to move forward. And I think that that's one of the fewer times in my life that I've felt growth as I was going through it. And one of the other ways, one more fun way, I guess, that I like to measure growth is by taking online quizzes. Imagine if I was like, this is sponsored by Myers-Briggs. Just kidding, it's not. But I actually today was taking this quiz. So this is a good little segue. I was taking this quiz from, it's the Institute on Character. Is it VIA or is it just VA? It's VIA. Okay, so it's the VIA Institute of Character. And they tell you your character strengths based on a survey. And so I logged into this thinking I'd never taken it before. And I was trying to figure out my character strengths. And apparently I took this on December 4th of 2018, which happens to be during that time that I was just talking about when I was in therapy and experiencing a lot of growing pains. And according to this survey, my top 5 strengths are perspective, judgment, social intelligence, prudence, and hope. And so perspective means, in this case, they describe it as being able to provide wise counsel to others, having ways of looking at the world that make sense to oneself/others. And I definitely feel like that makes sense for me. I think that I almost want to relate this. I don't know if empathy is one of the strengths that you could have, so maybe I shouldn't relate these two, but I feel like this relates heavily with empathy, being able to have perspective and understand that what you're thinking and feeling is valuable, and so is what someone else is thinking and feeling, and being able to put yourself in their shoes and also still recognize that there's a difference between you and them, and that, just, I don't know, I guess being able to recognize that there are differences between your situations, but to empathize with them enough that you can provide them with counsel. And yeah, I feel like that definitely makes sense for me. I've always had a lot of empathy, but today I retook it, and on this day in 2020, my top strength is love, which says valuing close relations with others, in particular those in which sharing and caring are reciprocated, being close to people. And I also got humor, perspective, social intelligence, and kindness. So, well, of course, these are all good traits because they're not telling me any of my bad traits. These are, in fact, all supposed to be character strengths. Obviously, this is not giving a whole package of who I am as a person, just like Myers-Briggs can't, just like the love language test can't. But I think just in taking this quiz, it's proving to me that I've experienced some sort of change in myself, and either in how I think about myself or how I think about others and how I interact with the world. And so while these are all still positive character traits, and I even have some of the same, three that I had 2 years ago, it's showing me that I have developed and changed over time. And I would like to think that the development and change I've experienced has been only for the better. And so it's, therefore been growth. So I think I wanted to bring this up because this is such a tangible way of seeing my own growth. And I've also done this with Myers-Briggs. So with Myers-Briggs, from 2017 to when I took it in 2018 again, I had become less extroverted and more introverted. And so I noticed these things about myself, and I was talking to the person who showed me this quiz that I thought I hadn't taken. And I was telling them, I feel like I've changed a lot over the last couple of years. And I wonder, when I was taking this, now taking it and seeing the same questions again, I can imagine that I would have answered them very differently a couple of years ago. So for example, and this is, more of a trivial thing or trivial strength, although I think it's still important, humor ended up on my top 5. But 2 years ago, it didn't. And when I think about how I was feeling about myself 2 years ago, I didn't have a lot of self-esteem. I or I had a lot of self-esteem, but I didn't have as much as I have now. I guess I was not like super low, but I was in one of the lower points in my life. And while I still valued myself and I still knew that I had value, I wasn't feeling particularly confident. Maybe that's what I should say. I think there definitely is a difference between self-esteem and confidence, so I should probably say confidence in this case. I was working a job that I felt was only adjacent to the career I wanted, but wasn't, fully there. And it was part time. So I couldn't even say, like, oh, I'm doing this right now, but like I'm making a lot of money. It's paying the bills. Like, no, like I was living at home and I didn't really like my living situation. It wasn't what I envisioned, and I felt really down because I wasn't around like friends as much. I went from living with my best friends in college, Marissa being one of them, to like living with my mom and her fiance, who were partially living in New Hampshire at the time. And so I spent a lot of time alone, and I was working weekends. So a lot of times I missed out on seeing my friends and doing social things on the weekend unless I went out of my way to take a weekend off. And because I was only part-time, taking a weekend off meant losing out on that money. And my student loans came due. And so I started feeling like, oh my gosh, like, was my education even worth it if I didn't get, the glamorous job, and I am now paying for the education and am not even living where I want to live and working a job I want to work, and I'm not seeing my friends as often as I want to, and I had gone through a breakup and whatever. And so I feel like at that time I wasn't feeling great about myself. And so some of the questions as I was taking it today about like humor were basically saying like, you think you're funny, or you tend to be the funny friend in a group, or your friends would say that humor is one of your strengths. And it was saying things like that. And I answered like that it was like me or strongly like me for all of those. And I feel like in 2018, I probably was feeling so down on myself that I was like, I'm not even funny. I don't have anything anymore. Like, I feel like I just like I felt sorry for myself a couple years ago. And I fully own that now. I totally was like, I guess like feeling sorry for myself. And I think, it wasn't completely my fault. I was also like changing anxiety medication. So like, I was kind of going through it, you guys. But the point is, I feel like in 2 years' time, I've changed a lot and I've grown a lot. And even the way I articulate myself is very different. And I really would say that I have my friends completely to thank for that. A couple of friends in particular have really taught me how to speak in a really empathetic way, because I think that my intention has always been to show people empathy, but that I didn't always have the language to go with it. So I've started, saying things like, I can imagine how that might feel, or just asking questions instead of making assumptions. And I think reacting to things, like being slower to react to things. And when I do react to them, reacting to them more maturely and with more logic than intuition, things like that. So I've definitely seen a lot of personal growth in myself over the last couple of years. And that quiz was evident to me that I've changed. And the way I have thought about myself has changed clearly because I answered the questions differently. And so while it just spit out more positive attributes at me, and obviously, it's not going to tell you things that you have gotten worse at, I think that it is telling me that I've put in work in some areas that maybe I was lacking a couple of years ago, or I've become even stronger in areas that I already was good at, and that's great. So that was something I wanted to touch on. And then I really enjoyed the fact that they also linked this to COVID and talked about personal growth in terms of COVID, because obviously we've all spent a lot of time with ourselves, me being one of those people. And I don't know. I feel like I just short circuited in my brain. Like it all of a sudden became very apparent to me that like it's only me doing this episode and I have to fill all the dead air. Anyway, Sorry for whatever just happened like 30 seconds ago. Back to the point. Sorry. Oh my gosh. Wow. Whoa. Chill out. Okay. Whew. You guys, I'm really okay. Oh my gosh, Marissa, where are you? She's at home, by the way, if you're wondering. Also, other tangent, I feel like my voice changes. So when Marissa and I record together, it's often at night, which this is also at night. But for some reason, I feel like when I record with Marissa at night, my voice tends to get lower. Like I'll be like, I'm like talking like this. Do you hear that? Do you hear that difference? Is this hitting different in your headphones? Wait, am I even doing it? Hold on. So I'll sort of be talking like this. Do you hear that? But right now I'm sort of talking like this. Okay, maybe I'm not doing that. Okay, anyway, let's move on. So in COVID, I've been spending a lot of time with myself. I've also been spending a lot of time with Marissa, so I can't say that I, am hanging by myself. Like I literally am not. I'm in our apartment that we share, and we are around each other a lot, and we're often interacting with each other. Like it's not like we ignore each other. We're best friends, so we're interacting a lot, hanging out a lot. But I have had a lot of time to sit with my thoughts, and I've also had a lot of time to scroll through social media and sit with other people's thoughts. And I think that what I've learned is that I am not always doing the things that I want to be doing and the things that would really fulfill me. And it calls back to my rose, which is that I have become more aware after watching what other people are doing to fill their time in quarantine, that I am not doing all the things that I want to do. And look, some of those things are not going to happen, or at least not right now. Like I obviously started quarantine trying to learn guitar. We've been over this. We know that Marissa tried to teach me guitar. We were doing pretty good, pretty well. And then I just sort of slipped off of it. Like I feel like I had like some shaky confidence around the guitar and felt sort of frustrated. And then I fell off of it. Totally my bad. Haven't picked it back up since like May. And that's okay, because while learning guitar is something I would ultimately love to do, there's no rush to do it. And I don't feel like a specific calling to it right now. It's something I've wanted to learn my whole life. The guitar is always going to be there. But this feeling that I've had about design and about creating for like online and for the digital space, that's something that I could potentially see me implementing into a career or into a side hustle. And so side hustle is so cringy, isn't it? But like, what else do we call it? Like a side career, a sidecar, like career. I'm going to call it a sidecar. So it could end up being a sidecar, could end up being my career, I guess. I don't really know. I'm just a gal figuring it out. I'm a writer. I love writing. And that's something I also could see myself doing forever, and editing. So I don't know. What I do know is that I have this really strong pull toward design, and watching other people do that and taking the time to learn more about it and learn more about the tools that they use and learn more about like what you actually can design, like what types of content I could physically make and enjoy. Like I guess I always was like, oh, I don't have a reason to design. Like I don't have like a client that I'm designing for. But what I've realized in quarantine through watching people design things for fun and through trying to create for the sake of creating is that like I don't have to have a reason. I don't have to have a person paying me to validate me. I can just design and have fun. And I think that is an area that I'm really experiencing some personal growth in right now is realizing that it matters to do things that matter to you. It doesn't matter if you get validated for doing them. It doesn't matter. Like, and validation comes from, compliments. It comes from payment. It comes from likes. All of those things can be great, sure. But you don't have to get those things in order to enjoy what you're doing. And you also don't have to post everything you're doing on social media. So like, I don't know what I'm going to design first. Like I said, I have like a little bullet list in my phone of things that I want to tackle, like as like fun projects for me, like phone backgrounds. And I'd like to play around with some designs for the podcast and like for like our Instagram and whatnot. Obviously, we love our cover art, and we originally started off with making just like little cute borders around our Instagram photos, and then I definitely got sort of worn down from doing that. I started feeling like it didn't feel creative enough, and yet it also felt kind of taxing and things like that. So that's an area where I would like to feel a little more creative and sort of stimulate my brain on that. But I have other ideas too, and I think that that's an area where I'm experiencing growth, is just like learning that what things actually bring me joy, and learning that I'm allowed to do those things and that I should do those things, and also like not just do them but invest in them. Like I said, I felt like I wasn't allowed to get an iPad or an Apple Pencil because I felt like I was being a corporate shill, and I was selling my soul to Steve Jobs, God rest his soul. And I just felt like, oh, I shouldn't do that because, no one's paying me to design. So why am I going to put my money into tools to design? And I don't know. I understand why I felt that way. I understand that like I don't have money to throw around. And so dropping money on an iPad is something to actually think about. It's not like a given where it's like, well, of course I need this because it's my job, But I think that I can validate myself. Like I can be my own validator and say, hey, Jess, like that's something you've been wanting to do for a really long time. And it gets you really excited to think about it. And you have these ideas of things you want to tackle first. And so like maybe you should do it, because I keep trying to find other outlets and it's not really working. Like I keep trying to find things that feel stimulating to me and they just don't. So that's a mindset change. I'm no longer going to be trying to fulfill myself with activities that don't fulfill me. I'm going to actually try to go after the thing that I really want. And that's exciting. Other personal growth things I've experienced since COVID. I mean, of course, Marissa and I talked about this a little bit in an episode, but everything with the Black Lives Matter movement, I've learned so much about systemic racism in this country, and what systemic racism actually means. Because I think that was a phrasing that I knew, like, I guess the definition of, and I knew why, like I could tell you like, yes, this exists and here's proof of it. But I think really learning the background of how systemic racism got implemented and became the backbone of our country was something that it's something that I needed to learn, and I am still learning, but I've learned a lot so far. And that, like I said in another episode, is totally thanks to all of these people online who are willing to share their stories and willing to share resources. And I feel like in terms of me as a person, I feel like I've grown a lot in terms of what I've absorbed and then carried with me. And because I've carried it with me, like how I interact with the world. Like I now feel like I question things when I see them happening. I question myself when I feel like I'm thinking a thought that might be, racist or might be rooted in racism. When I'm feeling upset or down, I feel like it gives me perspective. It gives me a fire under me. I just feel like everything that I learned or have learned so far, because there's always much to be done and much to be learned and much to be undone and much to be unlearned. While like just looking back on what I've learned so far, I feel I've definitely seen myself expand my knowledge and grow in that area as a human and really confront some of the things in myself or in my upbringing and, in my town that I don't necessarily, or the town I grew up in, that I don't agree with and that I'm unhappy with. And even in Boston as a city, I've definitely learned in recent years, it wasn't really the last few months since COVID that I learned this, although it definitely hit home during COVID, especially in June. But I learned that Boston is a really racist city and that we have a lot of work to do, and that we've really been riding on the whole, the fact that we're in the North and that we are a progressive state. I feel like we really ride on that, but we don't always put our money where our mouths are. And I think having all of that and knowing the things that I know now has definitely grown me as a person and expanded my mind and expanded the way I interact with the world. So I would say that's a huge thing. What else? Oh man, personal growth since COVID. I think this time also illustrated to me that anxiety is more than just something that you're diagnosed with, and it's really a universal feeling. And I feel so empathetic towards people who are experiencing high degrees of anxiety and depression right now. And what I'm about to say seems sort of funny to say in like juxtaposed with what I'm saying, which is that I feel terrible that people are feeling such high anxiety and high depression. But what I've noticed is that I actually I feel like mildly anxious, mostly because people are dying and we might end up with the same president for the next 4 years. Of course, I feel anxious about that. But I've noticed on the whole that normally this time, COVID, would be extremely disruptive to my anxiety. I think a few years ago, it would have been really hard for me to handle. And I've noticed that I've been handling it pretty well. I've been able to really stay level-headed and, keep my head above water and not panic. And for someone with panic disorder, that is kind of a feat in and of itself. And I think that this time has taught me a lot about the work that I've put into my anxiety, and also just I guess how important anxiety medication is to me. Because I think if I didn't have that on board, I would be suffering more. But I think that that's an area of personal growth that I've seen in the last few months. Not necessarily from the beginning of COVID to the end, but from the time that we weren't in COVID to the time that we have been in quarantine. I'm like, wow, okay, the fact that I'm able to navigate this with more logic and with less anxiety says a lot to me about how I've grown over the past few years and even the past decade, because I've been dealing with anxiety for coming on 14 years. So I'm struggling to think of where to go next. I feel like those are the things that most come to mind when I think about personal growth in the last, 24 years of my life, but also specifically in the last year. I'm just going to say year because at this point, COVID technically has been around, let's see. Well, if we're going back to March, it's been 6 months? But I kind of just want to call this a year because we've been in the apartment for a year, and it just feels like overall in the last year, pre-COVID and then with COVID, 1 full year, those are the things that really come to mind that I've experienced growth in. This was a really great topic, though, and a really great way to sort of reflect back on my life. I feel really self-indulgent recording a whole episode by myself about myself, which, like, to be fair, I guess I also did that when I talked about imposter syndrome. Like, I talked a lot about myself and my experience with imposter syndrome, but it's kind of like talking about a topic at large, whereas this literally feels like talking specifically about me, which, I guess was kind of the point of the solo episode. I asked, like, what do you want me to talk about? So it makes sense that I talked about me, I guess. But I hope that you got something out of this episode. I hope it made you think on some ways that you've grown, things that you can give yourself a pat on the back for, because you deserve it. We all deserve to give ourselves a break during this time, and we all deserve to look back on our lives and see our growth and acknowledge that and give ourselves a much needed pat on the back, I guess. Like, I don't know what other way to say it. I feel like it's just really important to acknowledge growth. I feel like that's how you grow more, is when you're able to look back and to see it and to say, like, I want to keep on that path. So, like, when things are tough, I'm going to push through them because I know that I've been in this place before and pushed through it and it brought me here. And so the best way to grow is to acknowledge growth, in my opinion. So thanks for helping me acknowledge mine. Thank you to the person who suggested that. And thank you for listening. I hope this wasn't a total snooze fest. And if it was, I hope you had a very restful sleep. Thanks so much for listening. And if by chance you're listening to this and you didn't come from our Instagram, if you would like to suggest more topics for me and Marissa, or for me if I ever do a solo again, please go follow us on Instagram. It is at Apartment6Podcast. And outro music, let's go.